VP of Engineering at LaunchDarkly, and this is my third week on the job. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. And I've been so excited to hear from all these guys. Aaron, Traci, Isaac, thank you so much for coming to present. The presentation was awesome. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. You guys start thinking about if you have any questions for the panel. I'll turn it over to you in just a few minutes. So keep that in mind. I'll walk around with the mic when it's time. But to start with, we've talked a lot about teams and how teams manage change in a complex environment. So what I want to start with is just have each of you tell me a little bit about the software team that you work with or on, the size, what's how you work together just briefly, and then I'll transition that into how we use some of these tools that we've talked about. Isaac, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. So Armory is about 18 months old, so our team is relatively small. We're a team of 6 or 7 engineers and 1 product manager, I guess 2 product managers now. And so the way that we work is very closely working with customers and getting just a lot of kind of quick iteration and feedback. We try to really push things out on a weekly basis, whatever it is, just try to get something out on that week and then iterate. And I guess feature flags are a huge part of the process that we employ, which is in order to be able to push something into production and share it with somebody in a safe way, you need to have feature flags available. So again, when we start our development process, we'll start with a feature flag and constantly just continue to deploy it into production. And then the moment that the product manager feels like we have something for one customer that is usable or at least enough to get feedback from, flip the switch and let that one person see it so we can get that quick feedback without ruining everybody else's experience, because that first go at it isn't always the best one. But the team itself is a fantastic team. They're all kind of veterans, very, very smart, and are able to make really, really good engineering decisions. Again, we were talking about like integration and unit testing. That's a part of our cycle. So we're not just always deploying stuff in production and just depending on feature flags and canaries. Part of it, there is a software development practice that has to be taken care of before and has to be a rigorous process in order to kind of be able to use these other tools successfully. So, I mean, everything goes hand in hand. It's not just like either or. And so, that's kind of how we use some of those tools.
Fantastic.
Cool. So we're about, I think, 13 engineers total, and then VP of Engineering and our CTO. And for me, I'm working mainly on the front end, which is basically me, our front end lead, and our front end manager. And then we have operations and a back end team. And then of course sales, marketing, everyone else. But the team I'm mainly working with is about 14 people, I'd say. So pretty small.
For Confluence, I won't go into Atlassian because it's pretty big nowadays. It's more of a corporation than a fun place to be, but it's a great place to be. Mountain View is where it's got to be, so you should hit up James. But for Confluence more specifically, we've got about 45 to 50 engineers at the moment. Some of them are actually in Sydney for another 3 months or so, and then we're going to start ramping them up here as well in Mountain View. About a year ago, Atlassian said, we've got this thing happening in Mountain View now. We need to get a product over here so that Mountain View really owns something. So they decided on moving Confluence because it's the best product. And so they decided to move the Confluence Cloud team over here, and they actually moved about 20 of us, 20 Australians and New Zealanders and others to actually come here and sort of spread the joy and spread the love with the rest of the team. In the past, I was actually quite heavily involved in the front-end aspects of Confluence Cloud, and that's why I was quite intimately involved in that whole ADG3 rollout and customer pain and testing in production experience. But more recently, I'm actually sort of bringing a lot of the learnings and a lot of the love that we gave to the front end and trying to bring that into the back end for Confluence. And at the moment, we're releasing every single day, really, like twice a day. For the back end, for the front end, we're actually continuously delivering, so every single commit. goes to production, and we're trying to get to the point where the backend can do that. But feature flags play a heavy role in that, because an example of a change that we're trying to test and roll out right now is something that actually Anastasia in the crowd's working on, which is pagination in the product. So pagination for large customers is a really big problem, because when you're dealing with shared databases, the big heavy customers actually consume a lot of resources, and we're actively trying to work on resolving that and fixing that. And one example is we've got a feature flag right now which actually toggles, should we use this more restrictive but database friendly manner to resolve all these pages, or should we actually just use the old manner, which is going to get everything and just kill your database. So yeah, that's how we do some stuff in production.
Fantastic, thank you guys. So we have representatives who work on teams of different sizes, one at about 6, one at about 15 or so, one at 50. And thinking of those and your, maybe previous experiences in your career, what are the inflection points in team size and team complexity where change gets harder? And what do you do about those things? And Aaron, why don't we start with you this time?
I think for us, there's actually 2 inflection points. There's one quite down low. So when you've got a team size like 2, and you're in a corporation, and so when you're in a public company, there's a lot of sort of regulations around how you actually do change management from compliance point of view. So when you're in a team of 2, it's really difficult to get anything done, because you're always blocked waiting for the other person to review your work, and the other person's always blocked waiting for you to review their work. But after you sort of stretch out of that team size of 5 or 6 or so for an individual squad or an individual team of ownership or a piece of work that they're doing, it also gets unwieldy, because you end up with sort of too many cooks in the kitchen, and everyone's sort of got their own way of doing things, and that's where you sort of need a good strong sort of squad lead or a good strong team lead that can sort of corral everyone and get everyone on the same page and making sure people are moving forward with the same direction. So at least within Confluence and most of Atlassian, we try and keep team sizes roughly at around the 5-person mark to make sure that there's not too many people all contributing to the same thing, because it just becomes too messy.
Yeah, I think once you have to get up from your seat and have to walk over to someone, then that is like, okay, we need a different system. But if I'm sitting next to somebody and I can just literally turn my chair and talk to somebody about something, then makes it really easy for collaboration. But once I'm having to like get up, walk over, and to talk to somebody, then I want to just be able to Slack them or other collaboration sort of methods. So for me, it's more like once you get to the point where you can't just turn around or talk to somebody right next to you, that you need other systems in place.
I think you guys used all the good words. I don't know that I have much to add here. I've also only worked, the largest team I've ever worked on was 25. I've always done startups, but I think you're right. Going from coding by yourself, you get a lot of fun. You don't have to really talk to anybody. The moment you get a second person, you got the bottleneck. And then, we're at like 6 now. I think once we have maybe the next 1 to 2 engineers, I think that's our next kind of inflection point of like, how do we start breaking things up, thinking about teams, thinking about what they're kind of working on, and then the communication structures change. A lot of it actually depends on Jira and Confluence, right? Like, how do you share information across teams? It's depending on those tools. So.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone in the audience have a question that they would like to ask the panel?
Hello. So question, Aaron, you mentioned that every commit goes to production for the front end team? Like an engineer committing code?
Yep. Sorry, you need a mic.
Yeah, so everything that an engineer does still has to be reviewed by a peer review. So we have PRs that happen, but every single merged PR for the front end goes to production immediately. So the build process is about a 10-minute build process for the front end. Like Webpack takes a long time nowadays. But after that's actually done, we've got under a minute, all of production's actually got that change. And likewise, from a rollback perspective, if shit hits the fan, we just hit the rollback button, and under a minute, it's all back to normal.
So I guess I missed something. When does the unit test and the integration test stages happen?
So that happens as part of that 10-minute pipeline. So we actually parallelize all of our builds so that we can actually preemptively build our development and our production bundles but we can also run our integration tests and our integration unit tests at the same time. So, but overall, the whole job time is about 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Since I've got you here, the part of the challenge with things changing so rapidly and the tools and everything that's available is knowing when something is worthy of, making a leap or something that has, a significant impact. I know you talked some about the areas. Maybe if there's something more each of you could say around, what was the light bulb that went on and said, we should do this, or was there an event or some trigger around that? Because I'm looking for similar types of triggers as I move along our team's development process.
For Confluence, we get to, in some aspects, so there's a certain level of engineering work we get to drive internally as engineers where nothing's always good enough. Like there's always tech debt that we want to clean up, or we always want to refactor something, or we always want to re-architect something because the last person that did it didn't know what they were doing, kind of thing. But we also get to, being a bigger company, at least in Atlassian, we also get to rely strongly on product managers that have this, and the design team. So we form a triad between the design, product, and engineering to actually come up with those decisions about what should we be doing in those aspects. So customer-facing features and customer-facing impacting functionality. So I guess for myself, I'm lucky in that I get to rely on those other two people in the triad to actually help bring those decisions to the table, and I just have to make a decision on how technically we should do it.
Cool.
Is the question, how do you decide when to kind of move to new technology? Like,
Well, in general, and I'm looking if there's anything specific. Usually it's the more recent things that you realize and said, this is something that really had an impact for us.
Oh yeah, so I'll tell you the story. I don't know if it's a good story, but what happened to me at the last company, I was acquired by a bigger company, and as part of that acquisition, I instantly lost all the control I had as a startup, which is, kind of run a little recklessly, to be honest. But that's just part of being a startup. But when you go to a bigger company, there's a lot more risk involved. But they kind of took it in the way opposite direction. So I went from complete freedom to kind of complete shackles, right? And I realized that was really, really bad. And I didn't believe it actually had to be that way. I believe that there are systems and things that we could build in order to reduce risk, and I get my freedom, right? And those things, again, being feature flags and canarying and a good software delivery process. So when I joined this new company, we ended up kind of rewriting everything from scratch. We shut down product for 2 months because it was so bad that we couldn't get stuff out the door. We ended up letting an engineer go, and we couldn't even deploy our own website because that engineer had all of the secrets inside of his head. And so enough was enough at that point, and so we rewrote everything. And so the reason I say it's not always a good story is that sometimes systems just have to break down completely for you to start realizing how bad things actually are. And so at that moment, the CEO realized, I'm going to him and I'm saying, I can't deploy the website. I don't have passwords. This guy has it in his computer, and he left. And that allowed us to have the window to think about how to reimagine how we do software delivery, how we do our infrastructure. And in doing that, we moved everything to Kubernetes. And at that point, Kubernetes was kind of a show, I would say. But we didn't have any really other alternative, and that paid off. We were lucky. Our software delivery process, again, we moved completely to CD. You merge to master, it goes to production. You don't need 2 VPs of approval who have no idea what the code is doing in the first place anyways. We shut down manual QA that was, I think, somewhere in Eastern Europe that I literally, they passed me their QA review process, and it literally said something like, check the entire website, and that was their process. I was like, okay, they're valueless, right? They say they're doing things, but we would still be releasing bugs into production. And so, sometimes it takes for systems to break down pretty bad in order for you to make that type of sweeping change. And that's ultimately what happened to us. But now moving forward, the way that I look at things is I tend to measure things a lot more, like overly measure things. So, for instance, our deployment pipelines, like, it's not, nobody just pushes a button and then things end in production. There's a whole process that goes into it. And in fact, the deployment process starts really the moment you create a Jira ticket and you start developing, right? Because you're going to need to test this on some environment. And then you start realizing what between the moment that the Jira ticket got started and the moment it gets in production, what are all the things in between that you can approve? And there are a ton. And usually a lot of those things aren't even logged anywhere, so you don't even know, you don't see them, and people pretend that they don't exist, so they think that it doesn't take very long. But that's kind of, from my previous process now, I'm starting to look at it and starting to measure those individual steps. So, yeah.